Yes, yes.
Okay, let's start now. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. If you want, just remind me at the end and I'll tell the significance behind this prayer. A quick recapitulation of this book that we are covering in brief, that is How to Make the World Add Up, which is about different rules, 10 rules to think about analyzing numbers. Now, a quick introduction as to what is the motivation. Why do we even need to bother about how we are analyzing numbers? It becomes very important because if you see this picture on the right, these guys, after World War II in the 1950s, they came up with a very critical research paper, which was perhaps the first research paper that was linking lung cancer with smoking. And the photo on the left, which is like a merger of two photos, it's basically representing the cigarette companies of that time, uh, who wanted to sort of level down their research so that people still continued smoking, and they ended up collaborating, or maybe I would say hiring, this person called Daryl Huff, who was a very famous author at that, still is today, even at that time, about of the book How to Lie with Statistics. So yes, it is very much true that you can lie with numbers, but as you see the quote in between, if it's even easier to lie without them. So if you don't get your numbers aligned properly, if you don't have a good benchmark, if you don't have a good way to analyze things, the chaos becomes even more prevalent. And that is why the motivation to analyze numbers properly. Quickly looking into the first rule, which was essentially searching the feelings. The rule was basically emphasizing that before doing any analysis, starting any kind of number crunching, you should take a note whether you are in favor or do you have a bias towards a certain outcome. Suppose I am doing a research on this topic, that all multi-billionaire industries, they are what kind of impact they are causing on the environment. If I am initially biased myself that these all these companies are just out to destroy the world, that may very much affect how I am consuming the data. So that is why it is very important to be aware of your biases before starting. So because once you are aware of something consciously, it becomes easy to deal with that. And the case study which was illustrated for this rule, a real life case study, was that in the last century, 19th 20th century, this person on the right side, this person Han van Meegeren, he was a con artist. He ended up fooling this genius art collector of that time called Abraham Radius. The way he was able to do that was, he knew that Abraham Radius was desperate to identify a missing work of a very famous 17th century artist whose name I'm forgetting, but anyway. So he was very desperate. This person on the left was a genius, but he had this bias of desperation to get to a particular outcome. What was that outcome? I really want to identify the missing link before I leave this body, before I die or whatever. And but he also wanted to be very systematic about it. So what this con artist ended up doing was, he studied all the previous works of that famous Dutch artist, and he created a fake painting which sort of connected all the missing links together. A normal person would not have been able to make any connections. That the normal person would just look at the painting and say it doesn't make sense, the other paintings look different, this painting looks different. But Abraham Radius knew all of the fine details of the artist's works in the past. So to him it was as if, okay, I see this missing link, I see that missing link. He saw links where there were no actual links, in the sense they were fabricated links. So this is what the rule is basically saying, which I try to illustrate with this simple statistical tidbit. that when you're trying to estimate something, there is a variance component and there is a bias component. Variance, we all know roughly that if you increase your sample size, your variance more or less goes down to zero, it vanishes. But the bias will still remain if you don't deal with it. So if you're a very biased person in your analysis, the more data you collect, the more sure you will become of your biased answer or an outcome that you already want. So it's a very careful thing. It's a very important thing to be careful about your biases. It's a very philosophical rule as well, I would say. The second rule was ponder your personal experience. So what was this showing? This was showing that suppose you encounter something, like say the government is telling you that the average occupancy in a train is quite low, it will be a comfortable ride, something like on the right. But when you see the left, as in you personally take a train, you experience a lot of crowd, and it doesn't make sense because your personal experience is saying that the trains are crowded, but the government is saying that the average occupancy is low. So what here, it's a very simple thing, because average means adding up all the numbers and dividing by the total count, right? So it can be that some trains are occupied more in certain times and other trains are occupied less in certain times, and the average is roughly less. But there is a very busy route as well, and this is the route which many people take. So their experience can differ from the average statistic reported, but that doesn't mean that both of them contradict. Both of them are true. So the rule is basically trying to emphasize that when you are experiencing something, uh, about which you have been told a global number, it can be so that the global number is also correct and your local experience is also correct. Something similar with lung cancer, the research that came out, which I was addressing earlier, they claimed that it makes lung cancer 16 times more likely. Now, when you look at this number, it may, psychologically you would feel that people who are smoking are like going to have cancer the very next day. But then there are case studies, real life observations where people are seeing that other people are smoking but they are not getting cancer. In fact, a very famous line of joke is, some of my smoking friends used to tell me that देखो तुम इतना smoking नहीं कर रहे हो ना, देखना हम लोग से पहले तुम ही मरोगे. So like there's this notion that I am not seeing people dying that much because of smoking. But there is a missing, not exactly missing, but there's a justification that aligns both of them, which is that lung cancer in itself is a rare event. uh, Maybe at that time it was rare, I don't know how rare it is now because so much pollution has increased. Anyway, the point is, if something is a rare event, even though its chances increase, you will not see too much occurrence of it. But that does not mean that smoking does not influence lung cancer very much. So uh, again, there is a local experience on the left and there is a global claim on the right. Both of them seem a little contradictory, but it makes sense. So again, the thing is that you may come across many personal experiences in life which may seem to be contradictory with what the global number is, but that be more mindful and take that extra time to think whether there is a missing link or not. And at the same time, there was also another cautionary thing, which was that if you are looking at a global number, which is a measure, now what do I mean by measure? We take an example of the waiting time of patients for a doctor. So when you look at the global number, it may be say like 2 hours for a country. It means that on an average, a person has to wait for 2 hours or something before meeting the doctor. And the danger over here, which I'm trying to illustrate through this example, is if you use the measure, this measure of waiting times to achieve something, then it can become chaotic. Just like this very interesting quotation: when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, what the government of a particular country did was it looked at the waiting time and said, all the waiting time should reduce. We want to reduce the average waiting time for a patient. Very good notion, because you, as a country, you want to make sure your healthcare is better, and one aspect of healthcare being better can be patients waiting less for doctors. Makes sense. But what happens is when you do something like you give this official like statement at the very top, the way it flows down to the bottom is there becomes a sense of insecurity, laziness, corruption, everything mixed together. And doctors, what they ended up doing was they stopped taking prior appointments itself. So earlier doctors were comfortable with booking patients in advance because sometimes patient conditions are critical and they need to have that extra buffer period. But of doctors stopped doing that because they were facing the pressure themselves, right? That you have to reduce your waiting time. So they found a loophole. And when you, it's human nature, when you are under pressure, you will try to look for an easy way out depending on how much of a good hearted person you are or how much competent you are. So this kind of way to make things better is dangerous. Like using a measure to influence things is a very dangerous thing. I'm not going on the example on the left in the interest of time. So that was this rule basically, that look at your personal experience. Just if you are facing an event B which is intersecting with your belief A, that doesn't mean that the same event can also intersect with contradictory beliefs that you have. It's a very powerful thing if you think about it. One thing can have connections with two seemingly contradictory things. It's very much possible. The third rule that we had discussed last time was avoiding this thing called premature enumeration. And what that basically means is before you start to analyze, make sure you get the definition right of what you are analyzing. So, this was a very good case study where the British government was observing that in the London hospital, the death rates were low, infant mortality rates were low, and on some other hospital, in some other hospital, they were high. So they sent somebody to investigate, Dr. Lucy Smith, to investigate what was happening. She did a lot of analysis. What she ended up seeing was it was an edge case, which was being counted in different ways in both these hospitals. So basically, if the pregnancy ends before 12 to 13 weeks, legally that's a miscarriage. If there is a baby born after 24 weeks, it's legally a birth. But there are edge cases where there are births around 20 to 23 weeks of pregnancy. These are premature. These are called premature births, and oftentimes, sadly, the baby dies because it's not. I mean, yeah, the baby dies. That's all I'll say. So what was happening was that the London hospital was reporting it as a miscarriage. So miscarriage means birth never happened. So if birth never happened, then death can never happen. Very philosophical thing. What is not born cannot die also. But the hospital on the left was recording it as birth and then death. So by definition, their death rates were going up. So it was not a problem in reality, it was a problem in how reality was being recorded. So we have to be very mindful about the definitions, about the nomenclature, about what exactly we are counting before counting. So these were the three rules that we had discussed last time. And in every rule, I have tried to give this statistical sort of equation that connects to the rule, which I explain at the end after going through that rule. I have done the same for rule 4, rule 5, and rule 6 today. So for the third rule, before we enter into the events for today, is that when you have this two things are not independent, they are dependent on each other, then it is very crucial to know what conditional value are you conditioning upon. Your conditioning or your way of counting really matters, because if you're conditioning or counting in a different way, you will get a different answer. Okay, let's start with rule 4. Something very nice to read. Step back and enjoy the view. And this is the statistical thing that I will explain at the end. But let's see if anybody is able to guess the significance of it with the rule in between as well. Okay, let's start. So, oftentimes we come across sensational news or headlines that seem sensational. And okay, one thing I should ask is, I'm still audible, right?
Yes, audible, Gopal.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, we come across news that is quite sensational, and it seems to have numbers which present a big impact. Now, but let's investigate further. So, in 1965, two social scientists, Johann Galtung and Mary Rouge, they did a very fascinating thing and came up with a very fascinating observation, which was the observation was, and I will decode it as well because it seems like a coded thing. What counts as news depends very much on the frequency with which we pay attention. Now, what does that even mean? Let's understand with an example. So Max Roser is an economist. He's still there today, by the way. And he gave this idea. Imagine instead of a daily newspaper, you have, say, a newspaper which comes out only once a year or once in every 50 years, once in every 100 years. You get the idea. The frequency is not the same as daily newspaper. So imagine something like this. You have a newspaper that comes every once every year or once every 50 years. What would the front page of the newspaper would it look like? Would it say events that are happening, that were of interest for a day or two, like some political scandal which was just limited to a district or a state, or will it cover news that has a bigger impact? Naturally it will cover news that has bigger impact, uh, like on a very global level, what's happening in the world. Because think about it, you are looking at this newspaper once in every 50 years or once every year, so the news also changes accordingly, right? This is exactly what they were saying. If you are paying attention to the news daily, then naturally the content that will be put out to you would be of a timeline that corresponds to the daily flow of things. Market fall and rise for a particular stock, perhaps if it hit here and there, or some some riots in some area, stuff like that. So all of this news would be covered. But if you are doing it once in a very big span of time, you will make sure that you are putting very impactful numbers, like something like how much has education changed, what is the percentage of literacy in the with respect to the last year, or stuff like that. So this is the observation they made. Depending on the frequency with which you pay observation, the news definition will change accordingly. And that becomes kind of an issue, because now you think about it, you have all these apps that are not even operating at a daily frequency, they are operating at an hourly frequency. They are optimized to get your attention as much as possible, and they are supposed to deliver news every hour or so. So what kind of news they would deliver? uh, they would obviously not be able to deliver that impactful of a news, so they will have to change it accordingly so that it grabs your attention. Now coming to attention grabbing, it it would seem, if people read newspaper, if you guys read some kind of news, I don't, by the way. I get whatever relevant news I have to with my peers, discussion with my peers. So it's a very good investment. Just stay with a person who reads news daily for 5 minutes, and he or she will give you a download of what all is happening. It may be biased, but you get a good idea of what is happening in the world. So it may seem that most of the news out there is negative. This person died, this corruption is happening, this and that. And uh, there are many psychologists who claim that we have a negativity instinct, that we have an inclination towards negativity. That is why we are fed this negative news. But there are other and maybe more powerful researches out there that say that we are actually in general very optimistic people. Um, and I prefer the latter one, that we are very optimistic in terms of we make a lot of inherent assumptions, like being able to wake up the next day, or being able to reach office in time even after leaving 5 to 10 minutes late, and all of this. And Daniel Kahneman, he's a very renowned name in psychology, by the way. I think the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a bestseller, is his work. So he says one of the major biases in risky decision making is optimism. All of these, I don't know whether you guys follow the TV series on finance, stock market, and all. There was the scam 1992 a few years back, where it usually is it's a common theme, right? Not just financial world. It's there is a protagonist. He does a lot of hard work, or she does a lot of hard work, gets to a particular point, gets overconfident, does a blunder, and then either fails or get realizes their mistake and gets up. So this overconfidence being the downfall has been a very prevalent theme as well. And that is the thing. So we are very optimistic, and we have a nature for surprises as well. We really like to be surprised. And it's easy to give bad surprises than good surprises. So, like, the point over here is like, if there is a newspaper that is giving really sensational good news, like this person or this group of people did a lot of good thing for their community, and they increased the revenue by this and this, it people would read that. But it's just that it's very difficult to get. It's easier to get negative surprises, because there are a lot of bad things, seemingly bad things happening quickly around the surface. If and for the good things you have to dig a little deep. So that is the psychology behind the news having a negative bias. Now the thing is, so how do you differentiate between these numbers, these big numbers that are coming in news in front of you? How do you make sense of that? How do you digest them? How do you internalize them? So here are some ways to think about it. One way is to, if you are taking news, and not just taking news, if you are taking any kind of data, make sure that you are taking this thing called information that is coming at a the frequencies at a lower pace. The same thing with the 50-year newspaper and the one day newspaper. So basically step back and look at the horizon of things and consume information at a slower pace. You will get better information. Second thing is, you try to make sense of the trend. See, because if the news is saying, news is giving you one number, something like 100 people died in an airplane crash. Very tragic, very realistic, very tragic. But it could also be that overall flight safety is being improved, because if you compare with the last decade or last 20 years, maybe the flight crash rates and deaths are going down. Both of them are true, but the first one, the 100 people dying immediately, that's more sensational. So just when you are being given a big number, try to gather more numbers around that. In corporate, we have this interesting, not just corporate, I think this term called market research. If you are working on a particular project, you get a good reference of similar projects that are out there, so that you understand better. So similarly, when you are given with a big number in front of you, whoever it is. It may be your teacher, it may be your finance advisor, it may be some insurance agent. You take your time to get some more numbers and gather enough data which gives you a sense of scale. Because see, if you think about it, 100 people dying, that may seem like a big number, but big with respect to what? 100 people dying or 1,000 people dying, but what is the underlying population? Like, what is the frequency of people dying? All of these questions that give you more context about the size of the number in a relative scale, that is important, because it is very crucial to have a relative understanding of things. Uh, just looking at numbers, absolute numbers doesn't always give you the full picture. You have to look at the relative percentage of things as well. That is what basically this rule is trying to say. And the statistical connection that I would like to make over here is this beta symbolizes the power function. So when you are making any kind of inference based on data, try to get more data, because the inference which you make when you have more data, more sensible data, is going to be obviously better than the inference which you make just on one data point. And if you really think about it, you will see that most of the time we do that. We just take one number as an input, maybe one failed marriage, or one person failing in a class, or any kind of thing, and we imagine the worst out there instead of getting more context about the background. So step back and enjoy the view. It's very important to get a context of the data, and you can only do that when you take a moment to step back and look around to see what more data is there. Okay, so this was it for the fourth rule. Fifth rule is my favorite in the rules that we have covered so far, which is get the backstory. Now let's look at a real life research paper related case study. So some researchers did this experiment where it was very well designed, all the randomization taken care of. So they, in one store, they gave 24 choices of jam, and in another store, they gave only six varieties, six choices of jam. And they wanted to observe which store will end up selling more jam. So, Supratim, what do you think? Which store ended up selling more jams?
I think 24 choice, we have 24 choices.
Can you say that again? I didn't catch that.
Uh, I think, yes, am I audible now?
Yes.
I think 24 choices of jam should purchase more rapidly because of variation are there more.
Okay. That was not the case. So what they saw was, while giving less choices, the minimal sufficient choices but less choices, people were getting, uh, more or less, people were getting less confused. Too much variety was confusing them, and it was a very psychological thing as per their research, and that is why they ended up concluding with statistical significant results that where there was low choice, there was a lower number of choice, people were purchasing more. And maybe we can relate with our lives as well, because a very good example is this YouTube scrolling and Netflix scrolling dilemma. There are so many movies out there, and you will definitely know, I think 40 to 50% in your friend group, maybe you are one of them, you would search too much options before you end up clicking on a video. So It makes intuitive sense as well. But the thing is, when this research was tried to be replicated, it was not, the results were not matching. So what was happening was, some researches were getting the thing that you just said, which was 24 choices of jam having more options, sorry, 24 choices of jam, people were buying more from there, and where there were 6 choices of jam, people were buying less from there. So now this becomes confusing. One research is saying with statistical significance that if you put less number of choices, it will increase your revenue, people will buy more. One research is saying with statistical significance that if you increase your choices, you will get better revenue, more people will buy. So what exactly was happening? That was the question. Keep that question in mind, and let's look at this. There is a platform called Kickstarter where anybody can post a fundraising campaign, which means if you want to raise funds for building a certain project, IT project, you want to build some kind of phone, you want to fund your guitar song album, anything, you can go to the platform and start your fundraising campaign. One such fundraising campaign was on a potato salad. So the person who posted this campaign had very humble expectations. I just need $10 to make a potato salad. Can you guess how much money that person ended up raising in that campaign? I'm audible, right?
Yes, yes.
So again, there was this campaign for a $10 potato salad, which means the person needed a funding of only $10 minimum to do the potato salad creation. My question is, when the person posted that campaign on Kickstarter, can you guess how much money that person actually ended up getting in that campaign? Take a wild guess. Okay, maybe it's not very clear. The person ended up raising 55,000 plus dollars for the potato salad. Think about it. If you come across such things, life seems very hopeful. You know, I thought about $10. I ended up getting, how much percentage is this? 55,000 percent. No, no, not even 55,000. Yeah, like 5.5 lakh percent times more than that, or 550,000 times more percent more than that I ended up raising. Seems like a beautiful thing. But that's just one outcome out of many failed outcomes. So when we are looking at just one particular event in a set of many events, and even if the event may seem very beautiful or very promising, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is the reality, because the truth is that, mm, I think it was like 40% of Kickstarter projects get $0. You know, this this particular project getting a lot of money, it's psychologically very it's basically that kacha badam person getting famous. Because sometimes, we have this it's difficult to put in words, but we have this meme oriented way of making things famous. If something seems silly enough to a lot of people will talk about it. Or if something is like very simple but catches the eye of many people in that simplistic manner, it gets famous. But that happens very rarely, it doesn't always happen. So this now will come back again to the question that we raised with the first one, that why are there researches that are contradicting each other. There was one more research paper which published that some people are able to predict the future with statistical significant results. Now, it was a very powerful claim, and it was done by perhaps a reputed person only, this Daryl J. Bem. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This reminds me of the dialogue from Spider-Man: "Great power comes great responsibility," uh, and makes sense. If you're making an extraordinary claim, you have to substantiate it with very powerful evidence. And the way to understand it is a simple probability distribution. If you toss an unbiased coin 10 times, the probability of getting 10 heads is very, very less. I think everybody realizes that. But what if what if you toss the coin multiple times? What if you define a trial as tossing a coin 10 times and you do multiple such trials? Try to think about it, what will happen. We'll just come to it in a bit. Uh, does Okay, let me not ask the question, let me just give the story. So there is this famous story concerning this very famous statistician called Abraham Wald. Around World War II, he was working with the Allied forces to use data analysis to help them win the war. So one problem that he was given was that there were many fighter planes that were going to fight the enemy and coming back. They wanted to statistically understand how much investment how should they distribute the investment in the defense of the planes so that the likelihood of the planes coming back increased. Basically, they wanted to understand how which area of the plane should be given better defense. So the data point was the number of enemy holes, the number of enemy bullets in the plane that were coming back. So the distribution was something like what you see on the screen. You see that most of the enemy bullets of the planes coming back were centered around this region. And it made intuitive sense to everybody that okay, this seems the region where we have to do our investment on. This is where we should put in more defense. But Abraham Wald said you should put more defense on the engine side. Now everybody was over there, maybe not everybody, but many people were surprised that the data shows that this is the area which is getting most hits from the enemies. But why are you telling us to go against what the data is saying, apparently? So can you guess why did Abraham Wald say to put more defense on the engine rather than in this area where the enemy bullets were hitting more? that was because the fighter planes that were getting hit in the engines were not coming back. This is survivorship bias. When you're making your analysis on data that has been sort of filtered out, because here we may initially think that it's a random sample of planes, but it's not random. It's those planes that have been able to come back, that have been able to survive the enemy. So that doesn't exactly correspond to random sample of planes. And this is something that Abraham Wald could realize, which it is a very simple thing if you think about it, but it's a very powerful thing. More sometimes when we are looking at the data around us, it's not always a random sample. Even the ads that come to us on our phone, they are not random. They are curated as per our activity in the past. So this phenomenon is very much prevalent. And interesting thing is, many people today know the story as an intuition based story, that there was this intuitive idea that came to Abraham Wald's mind in 1 second and then he could figure it out. But actually, he did a detailed thesis on this survivorship bias. And the thesis is practically lost. Even I was trying to search for it online, it's not very easily available. So it's very funny that the story about survivorship bias is itself survivorship bias. That Abraham Wald's work on survivorship bias couldn't survive completely. It had a certain bias of surviving. So people just remember the intuition, but they don't remember the detailed analysis he had done behind that. And this is how it connects. When you have a coin which you are tossing 10 times, it's very less likely that you will get 10 heads. And when you are tossing, when there are multiple people tossing 10 coins, say 1000 people are tossing 10 coins, then according to the law of large numbers, you can Google it after this session if you don't completely understand it, but it makes sense. If a very large number of people are doing certain things, then even less likely outcomes become manifested. So if you have a probability of 0.001%, let's say, but if 1000 people are doing it, you will expect 1000 into that 0.001, which at least one or two people will end up getting that outcome. So this is a very powerful thing, this concept of law of large numbers. And this is exactly what was happening with these research papers. Even though one person was reporting a very fantastic research claimed by statistical evidence, it was very much similar to that person getting sort of lucky in getting a particularly rare outcome. That is what was happening. And one very powerful research paper was published, which you see on the right, which claimed most published research findings are false. And it explained, basically the crux of it was this thing only, that many people are doing these kinds of research, so it's likely that out of randomness itself, there will be one or two people who will get very beautiful numbers in their statistical research, which would be statistically significant. But that is just a manifestation of law of large numbers. And there is another thing as well which was happening, that survivorship bias on a different level. The journals were only willing to publish, nice research papers, in the sense that if you have a research paper that is claiming looking into the future is possible, that's a very powerful research paper, right? But if you have a research paper which is saying the opposite, looking into the future doesn't seem possible, you will still why will I publish this? It seems it is common sense only. It's nothing very special. So what ended up happening was all of these fancy, less likely things ended up getting published, but a lot of evidence which was against them did not end up getting published, simply how the structure of the journals were. And in some shape and form, that is how the journals still operate today. And this is survivorship bias. And this particular type of survivorship bias, publication bias, that somehow fancy research, seemingly fancy research, they tend to get more they tend to have more probability of being published than so-called non-fancy research. But it gives a very biased view of things. And so we have to very much understand that any platform from which we are consuming information, how much of it is influenced by survivorship bias, what is the criteria of information ending up in the platform in the first place. So this kind of things happen in politics also, that we have so-called right wing media and left wing media. If you look at the right wing media, then the news will be biased in a particular way, and if you look at the left wing media, the news would be biased in a particular way, simply because it's publication or survivorship bias. Only that kind of news which fits the narrative will be filtered through. Rest of the news may be filtered out. So it's a very, if you start thinking about it, you will perhaps even start doubting what to trust, what not to trust, what exactly is truly unbiased out there. But yeah, it's something to be mindful of. And an interesting thing over here is they did this experiment. Some country, I'm forgetting which country, some European country, they did a competition where there were four participants, four kind of participants. The competition was to predict what kind of stock will perform the best in the market. So this group was the people who were actually professional researchers in the field. This person was an astrologer. These people were, they had nothing to do with finance per se. They were running a YouTube channel on beauty and healthcare, something like that. And this was a cow. Interestingly, the cow would make predictions by going into a field which was divided into uniformly shaped squares, and wherever the cow would sort of pass stool or defecate, that is that is the stock that would end up being picked. So the cow would go someplace, pass stool, and if the place is corresponding to say stock A, then they will choose stock A. So that is how they did the research. And can you guess who came first in this, who came second, who came third, who came fourth in this competition of stock market analysis? I hope I have been audible uh, for the last, what, 10, 15 minutes. Now you can write it in chat as well. There was a competition of picking stocks in the market which would perform better. You have professionals in the field who are professional researchers, finance researchers. You have a cow. You have people who are not into finance, who are concerned with beauty products. And you have an astrologer. So who do you think, like, what was the ranking, first, second, third, fourth, if you had to guess? Let me just reiterate the question for Ayush who has joined now. So, Ayush, there's this real life competition that happened, a finance research based competition where the goal is to pick the best performing stocks in a particular time period. And you have four contenders. You have professional finance researchers, you have an astrologer, you have people who do beauty related stuff. They have a beauty product channel on YouTube. They don't necessarily understand finance. And you have a cow. The cow chooses stock by going in a field and passing stool or urine in a particular area, and whatever area corresponds to a particular stock which is pre-mapped, that stock ends up getting selected. So these four competitors are there. Who do you think came first, second, third, fourth in this competition?
I would say like the astrologer would be first, the cow would be second, and the beauty brand would be third, and the fourth would be the remaining one. What was the remaining one?
The
Can you please?
professional finance experts.
Okay, so like I would say professional finance guy would be like third in India basis. Basically for India, I would say the professional finance guy would be the third one.
Yeah. So I like that you said that astrologer would become first, because I think you all understood that the reason I'm asking this kind of question means the results were somewhat here and there. Like the professional finance people definitely didn't come first. That is what happened. So you had the astrologer coming last. Very surprisingly, you had the professionals and the cow at the same level of relatively same kind of performance. You had the beauty bloggers performing better than the professionals, and then you had the hosts of this competition performing the best. I will explain how. The hosts who organized this competition, they had already picked up 20 different portfolios, and when the competition came to an end, the most successful portfolio, they only showed that portfolio. So to the public, it seemed like they had just one portfolio, but there were 20 different portfolios. This goes to illustrate the survivorship bias. That specifically, two things actually. Predicting things in the financial market is very difficult. It's so difficult that maybe random guesses, because essentially we can expect that the cow is not having some divine qualities, the cow is picking at random, that even random guesses are doing better than professional research. Finance is so complicated, and in just because you will have in your life, as you enter and make money and your data is sold to various insurance agents, they will call you and tell you about various portfolios that are performing really well in the market. So what exactly is happening often is that there are a very big number of portfolios that don't perform well, but they don't tell you about that. They just tell you about the portfolio which is performing well right now. So it's an example of survivorship bias. Like people are not so much in control than we would expect them to be. That really comes out. And when people do try to give us data to show that, okay, how much I understand this field, I am an expert in this field, that can also be a very smartly curated data that they have. There is a truck passing by. Yeah, just like this example of sorry, not Albert Einstein, that famous thing with Thomas Alva Edison. It said he failed 10,000 times. His success is very much important, right? He ended up creating the bulb, electricity, something like that. Not electricity, sorry, the bulb. But even that is kind of in conspiracy, because Nikola Tesla is supposed to be the real genius. Anyway, the point is he failed a very big number of times before succeeding. But often, what happens is in life, when people are presenting their data to us, they will only present the best. It happens in schools. When schools will try to advertise themselves, they will coaching and all, they will show that okay, from our batch we had 10 students clearing IIT and whatnot, but what is the relative percentage of students that didn't clear? They will not discuss that much. In relationships, when people are sort of coming and expressing themselves to each other, they would just show the best side of themselves. So this survivorship bias is everywhere, and it's something to be very mindful of. And the question is then, how do you take care of survivorship bias? How can you tackle this? How can you deal with the misinformation in data? So there is a very good platform out there called Cochrane Collaboration. So what this essentially is that it's it's a portal where researchers, before doing their research, they will fill out a template that this is what they intend to achieve in the research, this is the data that they will use. Basically they will be very upfront about their claims at the beginning itself, what they are going to do. So this kind of thing really helps make the peer review very easy, because if you have a very systematic way of doing research where you are giving in a systematic way what you intend to do, someone to validate your research becomes very easy. And if it becomes very easy to validate the research, it becomes easy to get to the truth. Sadly, there are not many such collaborations that I came across, but this thing like the Cochrane collaboration, where people genuinely agree that we will be very upfront about our data and research, that is a very good step to remove survivorship bias from the picture. Any kind of research based publication bias can be removed. People will not be able to tamper with the data because everybody else knows you said this in the beginning, why are you changing your assumptions? So these kind of collaborations help. And there is a good story about Sir Archibald Cochrane also. Uh, in World War II or sometime in the 20th century, he either himself, yeah, he was a prisoner of war, and there were many prisoners of war who were suffering from bad diet. So at that point of time, he ended up creating a collaboration of prisoners, and he conducted a very systematic experiment which could help everybody understand what was causing the illness. And because of his work, many lives were saved in the prisoners of war camp. So this collaboration is named after him. Like just like he had collaborated in very difficult circumstances to get to the truth, such collaborations help us get the complete backstory of what is intended to be done, and there is less chance of any bias or any cheating getting in the way. And this was the fifth rule, which was basically get the backstory, which means whatever data is given in front of you, even if say it is me saying all of these things to you right now, you should take some time and go get the backstory of the data, get more context about the data. So next time if somebody is coming to you and telling you that I have a portfolio which is performing 10% better than the market, this and that, you simply ask how many portfolios in your company are underperforming. The more you think about it, the more intuitive you get about the questions that you have to ask to get the complete background data. And the statistical thing that I have linked with this rule is this: a random sample and an ordered sample are not the same. Some of you may know that this notation, this one on the right side, is for a random sample, x1, x2, x2, x3, so on. But this notation, x order 1, x order 2, x order 3, is not the same as a random sample, because there is an ordering. X order 1 is less than x order 2, which is less than x order 3, and so on. So there are situations where the data that is given to you has come after a lot of filtering. The data that has been given to you has survived a very big process of filtering. So do not treat it as a random sample. Be aware and try to get more context so that you can do meaningful research around it. So that was all. I see we have already crossed the 6 o'clock mark. Maybe in the next session, I will cover the other rules 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Two more sessions, and we can get done with this. Any questions or comments on the topic that are coming to mind? Any thoughts that you want to share? Any real life story that you also became a victim of survivorship bias? Maybe you ended up signing for a coaching that was giving this banner of whatever, this number of people go into IIT every year from our center, but you ended up realizing that it was from a different center, same organization but different center. So anything like that?